we're going to take a look at section 1.4, which is complex numbers. Now, complex numbers is one of those topics where if you're interested in science or engineering, you'll probably use complex numbers a lot. If you're not interested in science or engineering, you'll probably never see this again. Especially if this is the last math class you'll take, you'll probably most definitely never see this again. And in that case, just consider this like a fun little math adventure. And if you are interested in math and science, then this is going to be the beginning of a very long journey for you, potentially. So we'll start out with a pretty straightforward question. What is the square root of 9? Anyone? Anyone? Square root of 9 is 3. Yay, remember that's because 3 squared is 9. All right. Now what about this? What is negative square root of 9? Well, this one is a little bit more to interpret, but essentially your answer here is going to be negative 3. And that's because you have negative and then square root of 9, which is 3. Negative square root of 9, negative 3. Next question. What is the square root of negative 9? Now, in the past, you've probably written something like this. No solution, or undefined, or something icky. Well, that's no longer your answer. There is a solution. It is defined. The answer actually is 3i. Okay. You may have seen I before, you may not have. I is called, 3i in itself is called an imaginary number. I actually means the square root of a negative 1. The square root of negative 1. So if I'm trying to evaluate the square root of negative 9, technically what I'm doing is I'm saying, well, this is negative 1 times 9, which is the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 9, which is I, which is the square root of negative 1, times 3, or 3i. Okay, so this is the technical way of doing it. Another way is I say every time I see the square root of a negative number, I get rid of the negative and I put an I in. And we'll do some examples of that. So we have I is negative 1, square root of negative 1, and I squared is defined as negative 1. We'll get more into that later, but at least wanted that in your notes for the moment. So we'll do a couple of examples. I'll leave that here so you can see it. Okay, so check this out. So say we've got square root of negative 16. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, I've got this negative here. So I want to take that negative, instead of writing a negative now, I'm going to write an I. Then I have left is the square root of 16. So I took out the negative and I put in an I. I put the I outside the square root, and I left the square root of 16 in there. So I've got I, and the square root of 16 is 4. So I times 4 is 4i. I always write it in that order. I write the number and then the I. Alright, so try something like negative square root of negative 5. Negative 25. Square root of negative 25. So I want to get rid of the negative sign inside that square root. And the way I do that is I write an I. To get rid of that, all I need to do is write an I. So I have I square root of 25. So I have I times the square root of 25, which is 5, and it gives me 5. Hi. Yay! Alright, try square root of negative 3. Alright, again, I want to get rid of the negative, so I write an I on the outside. So, square root of 3, and that's actually all that's left. Can't do much better than calling it I square root of 3. That's about as pretty as they come. Okay. Super fun. We can do a little bit more fun stuff. We can go negative square root of negative 4. Alright. So we've got a couple of things to watch now. We've got a negative sign out front that has nothing to do with anything else. Then we have this negative sign right here that's inside the square root. Oops, that's inside the square root. We turn that into an I, and then we're left with the square root of 4. So that's going to equal, again, this is our negative I times the square root of 4, which is 2. So I have negative times I times 2, so negative 2I. That's about as crazy as those guys get. All right? So there's a couple of things that we'll talk about then. We've got 3 categories of numbers now. We have real numbers. We have imaginary numbers. Imaginary. And now we also have complex numbers. Real numbers. Numbers like A. A can go from negative infinity all the way to positive infinity. You know, square root of 3, 2, 6, pi, e, 2.3, 9.7. Any of these, they're all real numbers. None too bad. Now, imaginary numbers look like this. B could be anything, but times I. The only way you can get these is by taking the square root of a negative number. So put that down there. The only way to get these is to take the square root of a negative number. So you'll get something like 3i, or negative 4i, or 3.6i, or, I don't know, 5/2 I. Anything with an I in it is an imaginary number. Finally, we can have what we now call our complex numbers, which has a real component and an imaginary component. So you'll have something like A plus BI. It'll have a real part, and it'll have an imaginary part. So these will look like, 3 plus 2i, negative 5 plus 4i, negative 6 minus 3i, 2 minus 7i, something like that. You're going to get these, if ever, by solving the quadratic formula. We'll do that next time. Formula. So that's a really ugly solving word. By solving, there we go. So you're going to get these by solving the quadratic formula. That's the negative b plus or minus this thing. AC over 2a, that thing. If you know what I'm talking about, great. If not, don't sweat it. We'll get there next time. But the complex numbers, that's where you're going to see these come into play, is by solving that quadratic formula. So we'll do a quick look and say, well, let's do a couple of examples and just make sure you're on board with what's what. So take a look at 3 minus 2i, 4, negative 6i, 17 plus 6i, and negative 3. And I want you to tell me, are they real? Well, you don't have to tell me. I'm never going to know. Real, imaginary, or complex? So if you want to make sure that you're understanding what we're doing, pause it, come back, and identify each one of those as real, imaginary, or complex. So I'll assume you've done that. This first one, this has a real component, 3 minus 2i. So it's real, but it's also got an I in it. So since it's got a real part and an imaginary part, that means that it's complex. It has a real and imaginary part. Okay. 4 here, that's just real. That's just a regular number. It looks like everything you've ever used. Negative 6i. Not too hard to identify. If it's got an I in it, and just an I in it, it's imaginary. 17 plus 6i. This one again is going to be complex, because it has a real, R-E-A-L, I can spell, and imaginary part. And then negative 3. That one again is going to be real because it's just like kind of everything else we're used to looking at.